All right, recording's on. First topic from Krunal.
Thank you, Casey. This is regarding the create bucket logic that we have today. We already just to give more perspective to the audience here. um, we had a client which was doing repetitive create bucket recently, and then we discovered that was kind of choking the entire Ceph cluster. Um Apparently, after the multiple calls to create bucket was just to verify whether the bucket exists or not, which again was incorrect on the client's part, but still, that shouldn't have crippled the cluster was what we were thinking towards. And then looking more deep into the create bucket logic, what we found was, what I found was not super useful, and I thought probably the audience here might have more insights into it. So by default, like just to give an idea, when we do create buckets, we currently create two Rados objects. One is the instance object, instance ID object, and one is the bucket entry and entry object. And along with those two, we also create the index shards in the Rados, right? So depending on number of index that you set, you go and create those that many number of shards. The problem here is every time you go and call create bucket today, you do these operations every single time. And the funny part is the create bucket, we create a bucket instance ID, and then there is a static parameter counter that is incremented. So what the code currently does is it goes, creates an instance. Suppose the first time it went, it create foo.1. Next time it goes, the foo part remains constant because it is decided by the RGW instance ID :zone : blah blah blah. So the first prefix remains the same. So for the second create bucket, it goes and creates foo.2, assuming the prefix part was the same. And then it also goes and creates foo.2.1 shard, like depending on number of shards in the index pool. So it creates those, and then at the end it goes and tries to create the entry object for the bucket, saying foo is, assuming the foo is the name of the bucket. It goes and creates foo, and at this point of time it realizes, hey, foo already exists, the bucket already exists. So then it tries to unwind the previous two operations, and now it goes and tries to delete foo.2 entry instance object from the from the meta pool, and then also delete all of the shards foo.2.1 depending on number of shards from the index pool. So for every create bucket, it does this whole circus here. And I wasn't super sure why was this logic first added. The reason I say so is because when we send create bucket S3 request, when we call S3 create bucket, we already are load. We try to check whether the bucket already exists. So we do call load bucket driver load bucket, and at that point of time, we already have an information that this, if the bucket exists, if the bucket is present, we do get the entire bucket info object with the bucket exists. But we still decide to go and create foo.2 and then the individual shard index objects. So I was just wondering why was the logic, or probably was what could be the reason behind doing this. And then we eventually go and delete those. So we create them and then we delete them as part of this whole create bucket call. So was looking for insights like, why do we need this? Can't we just leverage, if the bucket exists, just go and do not recreate those shards, just go and update the instance ID, assuming there has been change in any metadata. I'll come to that second point. I also have an update on the metadata part on what we can update and what we cannot. But the first part is there any specific reason behind doing this, of creating another object and then deleting it back, or we call clean index and clean bucket in the code?
In the case where the bucket already exists, I don't think we should ever be creating a new set of index objects. I agree with you there.
Yeah.
You were right. You were in the tracker issue. You mentioned the Swift case where you can change metadata, but that should only update the existing bucket instance metadata, not create anything new.
Correct. That's what I was hoping. Exactly. Yes.
One thing might be, just to be on the safe side, if you could use some git blame to see when, like you're saying that there's a code that checks if the bucket is there. So
Right.
somebody added it and somebody didn't call return on the function when the bucket is there. So maybe if this was an outcome of a bug fix that some strange case, then maybe it is needed. But I would use some Git research to try and figure out maybe.
Sure. Yeah, I was hoping that I was planning to do that later in the. I mean, yes, I was just getting lazy, and I thought probably audience here might have some insight before digging that. But yeah, sure, I'll try to dig into that Git blame and try to figure out that as well. So coming to the second point, right? As Casey mentioned regarding the metadata, right? So today I was looking create bucket at least from the Ceph perspective and not AWS perspective. The only metadata that or probably what you can pass during the create bucket was one. We recently added a number of shards. I guess Casey added recently, beginning of this year. Then you can add location constraint, but that is again the first time. The second time you cannot modify once you have the placement decided which placement pool to go to. Then also you can modify. There was one more option. Just give me 1 second.
Hackles.
Hackles, yes. But again, hackles, yes, bucket hackles. So again, once the hackles have been decided, you cannot modify the hackles. So that is the reason. Coming to your point, UL, the logic is why they do this is they try to read the bucket and then see if the bucket already has hackles, if the bucket already has the location constraints, and bucket already has the index, the shards and number of shards and max shards. The subsequent create bucket, if it's trying to modify those values, it returns saying that error bucket exists with 409. So that is the reason we added 409 check. But if the second create bucket does not specify any of these params, it goes to the backend and does all of those recreation of those shards. So the only param or metadata apart from Swift, what I found, Casey, was object lock. So there is this wait a second, what is the name? I'll give you the exact name. Yeah, it is called as XAMZ bucket object lock enable. So only that is the one that can be either set to true or false, like in the subsequent calls. But again, once it is set to true, you cannot again set it to false. So that's what the documentation says. So assuming during the first bucket create call, the bucket object log was set to false. And now the second time when the user tries to call the create bucket and set that to true, then I assume we need to go to the backend and go and update the instance ID, the bucket attributes which is stored in the instance object, and make it true. That is the only use case I found to go to backend currently. So that was the second part. And that's what Casey also mentioned on the tracker, saying that only if the metadata changes, we need to go to backend. Otherwise, we shouldn't be going to the backend. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I wonder if we should treat object lock the same way that we do the other options and just return an error if that argument is different.
The next time. Okay. Yeah.
The way that I interpret S3's create bucket is that it should be a no-op if the bucket already exists and has the same parameters as the request.
Mm-hmm.
And so if object lock is different, I think we should fail up front.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, there's a put object lock command if you want to change it later on, right? Or I mean,
Yes.
usually you have like specific commands to change stuff.
Right. Same with put ACL, I guess.
Yeah.
So object lock used to be special in that you had to create the bucket with object lock enabled in order to set policy. But AWS eventually changed that, and I added support for enabling it after creation.
Yeah. So then probably we can get rid. So basically, any subsequent call should just return as is exist. Basically, I'm believing. So we don't need. We should never go to backend if the bucket exists, right?
For the S3 case, right?
For the S3 case, yes, my bad. Yes, let me be more precise. Yes, for the S3 case. And for the Swift case, again, we should still not recreate those Rados objects, right? Is that fair to say as well?
I definitely agree.
Yeah. Okay, that sounds.
You and Yuval were talking about Git blame to try
Yes.
to track this down. My assumption is that it came from just the zipper refactoring, because bucket creation, I don't know, it was quite convoluted, and we changed a lot of the code flows. when doing the zipper project. A lot of stuff, like we had to find the line between what the ops were responsible for and what the backend stores were responsible for, and so a lot of stuff moved around. It may be that the cell bucket object just doesn't know whether the bucket existed or not, or doesn't have a good way to check that, or we just moved code around and didn't check. But maybe cell bucket create bucket or whatever it is could either check its own exist state, or we could pass one in from the app.
All right. So then we at least have a decision. For the S3, we don't need to go to the backend if the bucket exists. And for Swift, if you go to the backend, do not create the objects again.
I agree, yeah. Just looking at RGW, the RGW create bucket app, you linked to the code in your last comment on the tracker issue.
Yeah.
We do some checks before we call bucket create, and then we do some additional stuff afterwards if it existed and we're changing metadata.
But that's for Swift, right? I'm guessing, because that need metadata call is basically for S3, it is always false. If you
exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
In that case, though, it's just loading the bucket metadata and writing an update directly. So I don't think that piece needs to change.
Yep. So basically, in that loop of S3, if the bucket exists and if it is S3, just return with 409, like with bucket exist.
There's the bucket exist check with the exist early returns.
Yep.
It's unclear to me whether the S3 case should return success immediately there, or if it should still call.
So there is a
bucket.
Okay, I thought we would want to return exist because there is an config variable in RGW which decides the return value, whether we want to return 409 or whether we want to return 200, which is called as exist. That's the reason by default, if we want to return bucket exists, I guess, as op return value should be. If you look at that same in this, if you just go down the next function, send response. If you look at that, the next line there, line 2731, or you see there's an override function, RGW bucket exist override. So basically, the S3 should return ERR bucket exist, at least for S3, and then depending on the config variable, we either send 200 or we either send 409.
Okay.
If you look at the same point, just a function just below that, get params, there's a function send response for S3 bucket, S3 create bucket.
Sorry, I'm looking at
A different
RGW op. You're talking about RGW REST S3.
Sorry, my bad. Yes, my bad. Yes, it is
Okay.
REST S3.
Yeah, I recognize that as a change that Matt made recently.
Yeah.
So I guess the question about the RGW create bucket op in the bucket exists case, should we ever call the backend bucket create function? It doesn't seem like we should.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I was thinking, and that's what I inclined towards. As long if you're not updating any metadata, there is no point calling the backend. And if people want to change attribute, you have those individual functions in terms of put ACL, put object log, or
right. So Dan G is the one that did a lot of the zipper refactoring work. So he would probably be valuable to give feedback here. But I mean, if you want to propose a PR,
Yes, I'll try to.
get him as a reviewer on it.
Yeah, I'll try to put in a PR. I do have changes. I just tested. I'll just put in a PR maybe today or tomorrow, and send you that. On that front, actually, I also have another account PR. I'll add the agenda, but once we are done with this, actually.
Great. And could I ask you to update the tracker issue for this create bucket issue, essentially with the consensus of what we talked about?
Yes, I'll do that. Sure.
Great.
All right, I'm just pasting another verse here. This is an account feature I'm talking about, migration. Casey, specifically, if I just pasted that in the notepad in our when a user is getting migrated. This is again similar on the create bucket sides. We store the ACLs as attributes, and those ACLs basically are stored using two members, or ACL owner and then policy. And both those members basically store the UID. Like so, suppose there's a user who creates a bucket. So when you create a bucket, even if you do not specify any ACLs, we do store default ACLs. They're basically saying, as you stating that the owner has full permission to the bucket, basically. So even though there are no ACLs, we still store we manually create a canned ACL param and store into the attributes, and those canned ACLs store the UID of the user, of the bucket owner. Now that user once is migrated to the account, there is a logic to go and update the ACLs, update the UIDs of every bucket to the account ID. But apparently, if you look at the code, actually, if you open the tracker, I pasted we are only modifying the owner. We are not modifying the policies. So the ACLs also store the UID along with the owner. So what's happening is the ACLs are has partial information, has partial UID in one member, and it has partial account ID in the other member. So the subsequent create bucket call fails, saying that you're trying to modify the policy, because when you call create bucket this time using the account credentials, it fails, saying that, hey, you're trying to modify the policy because the old policy still has a UID, and a new policy which is generated on the fly contains the account ID. And I was wondering, yeah, that bucket chown, there is a function. Why was it only modifying? Probably I first thought was this seems like an oversight and we missed to update the second member, but just wanted and looked at the code. This has been there for a long time, actually.
Yeah, that sounds like an oversight.
Yeah. So it just was purely kind of accidental. We discovered this we used during the create bucket issue itself. So I just thought of bringing it up here. Yeah. All right. I mean, it was straightforward, but I just wanted second thought on that. Yeah. Cool. I'll send a PR for that too. Thanks for the confirmation. Yeah.
Thank you.
That's it from my side. Yeah.
All right. The only other thing on the agenda was just an announcement that the Ceph Developer Summit started today. You can check the community calendar or the ceph.io link here for the schedule. The RGW meeting wasn't scheduled yet. The community manager is updating that. Sounds like we're planning to use this call next Wednesday for our CDS session. So please make it if you can. Would also encourage folks to check out the CDS sessions for other components just to see what's going on there. Any final topics for today's agenda, though?
Do we have any agendas for the CDS, like roadmaps or new features that we plan for the new U release or something?
Yes, that is in an Etherpad.
It's in the but okay. I couldn't. Yeah, I couldn't see anything for Ceph RGW yet there in that Etherpad.
Right.
I added a link to the pad to our agenda. Yeah.
Oh, okay. RGW CDS. I see. Oh, it's a separate one. So we have one common and then we have separate one for the RGW completely. Okay, got it.
Yeah, that's my fault for being pokey.
So yeah, this is just a starting list of things that we came up with during the call. We can discuss other things that people want to work on.
Mm-hmm. There was some discussion on the stability front, right? Do we plan anything on those? I remember you all was talking on the stability or something. You all was talking last time. Yes, last time. Yeah.
We've been discussing it, trying to come up with ideas and resources. Some of it involves just trying to see if we can apply some of the knowledge that's already in some of our downstream testing into some of our upstream testing. But it's still not it's an active area of discussion. We were planning. Correct me if I'm wrong, Keith. We were planning on discussing it, on at least starting to discuss a little bit of it, maybe at the next CDS, or not CDS, CSC, Ceph Steering Committee meeting. Although we would need to contact the. There has been progress, but nothing definite. There's been talking about it and trying to get more people involved.
Yeah, there was some good discussion about it in last week's refactoring call. Does look like everything's been uploaded for a while though. I'll check what they did. All right. Anything else for today? Thanks all. See ya.
Thank you.
Thank you.